The impact knocked the breath from Joan's lungs at the exact moment she understood what it meant to shield someone smaller than yourself from death. Pain radiated through her ribs as she pushed the 7-year-old girl behind the marble bar, her body becoming a barrier between the child and the violence tearing through the silver oak. But all she could focus on was the girl's breathing, quick and shallow, and the small fingers gripping the fabric of Joan's red apron like it was the only thing tethering her to reality. The child's curls brushed against Joan's bruised cheek, and somewhere beneath the ringing in her ears from the chaos still erupting around them, Joan heard herself whispering words she hadn't planned to say. "I won't let them hurt you. Stay down. You're going to be okay." She had no idea if any of that was true. 14 minutes earlier, Joan Rhodes had been refilling water glasses during the lunch rush, her mind drifting through the familiar territory it always covered during busy shifts at the Silver Oak. Rent was 3 days overdue, her phone screen had cracked last week and she couldn't afford to replace it. Her mother's voicemails sat unanswered because Joan didn't know how to explain that she was 26 and still barely surviving. The kind of thoughts that occupied the quiet corners of a waitress whose life had calcified into a careful routine of just getting through each day, nothing more and nothing less. She'd learned to move through spaces without being noticed, to smile at the right moments, and not to wonder too much about the men in tailored suits who occasionally occupied the private dining room upstairs. The Silver Oak sat in the heart of the city's financial district, the kind of establishment where corporate executives sealed deals over expensive wine and politicians held discreet lunches away from cameras. Joan had worked there for 2 years, long enough to anticipate what customers needed before they asked, and short enough that she still felt like she was watching other people's meaningful lives unfold, while hers stayed frozen in place. She was exceptional at being invisible. It was the only skill that had never failed her. The first sign came without drama, just a black Mercedes that pulled up too fast outside the restaurant's entrance, tires squealing against the pristine cobblestone driveway. Joan glanced up from the table she was setting, her hands stilling over the wine glasses as 4 men in dark clothes emerged from the vehicle with the kind of coordinated movement that made her chest tighten with instinctive dread. Her pulse spiked before her conscious mind could name the danger. The ornate glass doors exploded inward with a sound like thunder, shards glittering in the afternoon light as they scattered across the polished marble floor. Joan dropped into a crouch behind a table, her heart slamming against her ribs so hard it hurt. Voices barked orders she couldn't process. And then came the sound that would fracture her sense of safety forever. The sharp crack of gunfire, impossibly loud in the enclosed space, followed by screaming that seemed to come from every direction at once. She saw the little girl before anyone else reacted. The child appeared from the corridor that led to the private dining rooms, her blonde curls bouncing as she ran, her pink dress bright against the chaos, like a flower in a war zone. She wore white tights and small dress shoes, the kind of outfit that told a story of someone who had carefully prepared her for a special lunch that day. And her face held an expression that Joan recognized with devastating clarity because she'd worn it herself once, a lifetime ago. Confusion, the desperate search for a familiar face to make the nightmare stop. The girl froze in the center of the dining room, spinning in a small circle as if looking for someone specific. And that's when Joan saw one of the armed men near the entrance pivot, raising his weapon toward the back of the restaurant, toward the hallway, toward the child standing alone in her bright pink dress. "I won't let them hurt you. Stay down. You're going to be okay." She had no idea if any of that was true. If you're gripped right now by this impossible bond, a waitress shielding a mafia princess, help me prove something wrong. My mother said I wouldn't even reach 2,000 subscribers, but I believe stories like this, about courage found in the darkest moments, deserve to be heard. Help me show her these tales matter. Please subscribe and let's keep breathing life into stories that were never meant to stay silent. Now, let's continue. Joan's alarm didn't go off because her phone had died sometime during the night, the cracked screen going dark when the battery finally gave up. She woke to sunlight already streaming through the thin curtains of her studio apartment, panic jolting through her chest before she even opened her eyes fully. Late. She was going to be late. The envelope from her landlord sat on the kitchen counter where she'd left it 3 days ago, still unopened because she already knew what it said. Past due. Final notice. The words didn't need to be read to exist. She stepped around it the way she'd learned to step around most unpleasant things in her life, as if not acknowledging them might make them less real. She dressed in her uniform with practiced efficiency, white button-down shirt, pressed until the collar stood crisp, black vest that she'd bought secondhand but tailored herself so it fit properly. The red apron would come later, at the restaurant, but she folded it carefully into her bag alongside her notepad and the 3 pens she always carried because customers had a habit of walking away with them. The restaurant's back entrance smelled like bread and expensive coffee. Joan clocked in 4 minutes late, earning a pointed look from Marcus, the floor manager, but he said nothing. She was too reliable to reprimand over 4 minutes. She tied her apron, pocketed her notepad, and stepped through the swinging doors into the dining room. The lunch rush was already building, voices layered over the soft classical music piped through hidden speakers. Joan moved between tables with the fluidity of someone who'd learned to navigate spaces without drawing attention, refilling water glasses, delivering bread baskets, smiling her practiced smile. "Joan," Marcus materialized at her elbow, his voice low. "Table 12 in the private dining room, VIP reservation under Siegel. He's requested our most discreet server." Something in his tone made her pause. The private dining room upstairs was reserved for clients who valued privacy more than they valued being seen, the kind of men who tipped in crisp hundreds and never made eye contact. "Of course," Joan said, her smile never wavering. She had no idea that accepting that assignment would be the last ordinary decision she would ever make. Pain arrived before consciousness, a dull throb radiating from Joan's ribs and a sharper ache behind her left eye. The antiseptic smell hit her next, that particular combination of bleach and medication that could only mean hospital. She tried to open her eyes, but managed only the right one. The left felt swollen shut. The fluorescent lights overhead were too bright, turning the white ceiling into a painful glare. Joan became aware of pressure on her hand, not the impersonal grip of a blood pressure cuff, but something smaller, warmer, desperate. She turned her head slowly and found Betty Siegel's face inches from her own. The girl's blonde curls were tangled, no longer the careful arrangement from earlier. Her pink dress had a dark stain near the hem. Her eyes were red-rimmed and swollen from crying, and her small hand clutched Joan's fingers with a strength that seemed impossible for someone so small. "You're awake," Betty's voice came out as a whisper, thick with tears. "I thought you wouldn't wake up. They said you would, but I thought—" The child's words dissolved into a sob, and before Joan could process what was happening, Betty had pressed her face against Joan's arm, her small body shaking. Joan's free hand moved automatically to stroke the girl's hair, the gesture coming from some instinct she didn't know she possessed. "Hey, I'm okay. You're okay." Betty lifted her head, and Joan saw something in those young eyes that made her chest tighten. Recognition, relief, and underneath it all, a grief so profound it didn't belong on a 7-year-old's face. "You smell like Mummy's garden." Betty's voice cracked on the words. Her fingers tightened around Joan's hand until it hurt. "Please don't leave me. Everyone leaves me. Please." If that please shattered you, if you understand what it means to be someone's last hope, like this video and subscribe. Hit the bell for more stories. Comment below, have you ever been the person someone needed when they were falling apart? Your stories inspire these tales. The room went silent. Joan became aware of other presences, a nurse frozen near the door, 2 men in dark suits standing against the wall like statues, and in the doorway, backlit by the harsh hallway lights, stood Sam Siegel. He looked different without the chaos of the restaurant around him, still imposing, still dangerous, but the violence in his posture had been replaced by something Joan recognized because she'd felt it herself in the last conscious moments before the blow to her head. Helplessness. His tattooed arms hung at his sides, his jaw was tight, and his eyes, fixed on his daughter clinging to a stranger's hand, held a pain that made him look almost human. He opened his mouth as if to speak, then closed it again. Betty didn't even look at him. Her entire world had narrowed to Joan's face, to the hand she refused to release, to the smell of whatever cheap lavender soap Joan had used that morning before her shift. "I won't leave," Joan heard herself say. The words came out hoarse, her throat raw. "I'm right here." She had no idea if she was lying. The estate appeared through the tinted windows of the SUV like something from a different world. High stone walls topped with cameras that tracked their approach, gates that opened silently, operated by guards Joan couldn't see. The driveway curved through manicured gardens that probably cost more to maintain than she'd earned in her entire life. Joan's ribs screamed with every breath, the pain medication from the hospital already wearing thin. Betty sat pressed against her side in the back seat, one small hand still tangled in the fabric of Joan's borrowed hospital cardigan. The girl hadn't let go since they'd left the hospital 3 hours ago. Hadn't spoken, either, except to whisper, "Don't leave," whenever Joan shifted position. Sam rode in the front passenger seat, his phone pressed to his ear, issuing orders in a voice too low for Joan to decipher. The driver, a woman with sharp eyes and sharper posture, had introduced herself as Alina, head of security. She'd looked at Joan the way someone might assess a stray dog brought into a house with expensive furniture. The guest room they showed her made Joan's entire apartment look like a closet. Cream-colored walls rose to a ceiling decorated with subtle molding. The bed could have slept 4 people comfortably. French doors opened onto a private balcony overlooking gardens that glowed amber in the late afternoon light. "The bathroom's through there," Elena said, gesturing to a door on the left. "Kitchen staff can bring meals to your room if the girl needs privacy. Dr. Morrison will check your injuries every morning." Joan stood in the center of the room, suddenly aware of how out of place she looked. Bruised face, hospital discharge clothes, a child's hand gripping hers like a lifeline. "Why am I here?" The question came out more bluntly than she had intended. Elena's expression didn't change. "Because she won't let you leave, and right now what she needs matters more than what anyone else wants." After Elena left, Joan helped Betty onto the enormous bed. The girl's eyes were glassy with exhaustion, but she fought against closing them, as if sleep meant Joan might disappear. "I'm just going to sit right here," Joan said, settling into the armchair beside the bed. Her ribs protested the movement. "I'm not going anywhere." Betty's breathing eventually slowed, deepened, but even in sleep, her fingers remained curled around the edge of Joan's sleeve. Through the window, Joan watched the sun sink behind the estate walls. She could see guards moving along distant pathways, cameras swiveling on their mounts, the beautiful prison she'd somehow become part of. She was here to recover, they'd said, but Joan understood the truth settling in her bones like cold water. She wasn't a guest, she was Betty's anchor, and in Sam Siegel's world, that made her something far more dangerous than she'd ever wanted to be. Necessary. Joan woke to footsteps in the hallway outside her room, not the measured pace of guards on patrol, but something quicker, urgent. She lay still in the darkness, Betty's small form curled against her side on the oversized bed, and listened to the rhythm of movement beyond the door. 3 nights in the estate had sharpened her awareness in ways years of waitressing never had. She'd learned to read the patterns of the house the way she'd once read the moods of restaurant customers. The morning shift change happened at 6. Elena made rounds at 9 and 3. The kitchen staff moved through the lower floors between 7 and 8 in the evening. These footsteps didn't fit any pattern she'd memorized. Voices drifted through the door, too muffled to distinguish words, but sharp enough to convey tension. Joan carefully extracted herself from Betty's grip, moving with the practiced silence of someone accustomed to not being noticed. She pressed her ear against the heavy wood. "We can't keep her here indefinitely. She's a liability." The boss made his decision. The voices cut off abruptly, replaced by the sound of receding footsteps. When Joan cracked the door open minutes later, the hallway was empty, but the air felt charged, like the moment before lightning strikes. Victor Moss appeared at breakfast the next morning, settling into a chair across from Sam with the easy confidence of someone who belonged. He was younger than Joan had expected for a lieutenant in Sam's organization, maybe 40, with the kind of polished appearance that came from expensive haircuts and tailored suits. His eyes found Joan immediately, and something in his gaze made her skin crawl. Not desire, calculation, like she was a problem he was trying to solve. "This is the hero," Victor said, his voice carrying the smooth warmth of someone practiced at charm. Betty pressed closer to Joan's side, her orange juice forgotten. "Joan Rhodes," Sam said, and there was a warning in his tone Joan couldn't quite interpret. Victor's smile never wavered. "How are you finding the estate, Miss Rhodes? I imagine it's quite different from your usual surroundings." Joan had years of experience with condescension disguised as politeness. "It's very generous," she said evenly. "Generosity, that's one way to describe it." His eyes flicked to Betty, then back to Joan. "Tell me, how long do you plan to stay?" The question hung in the air like a threat. Later, while Betty napped, Joan walked the gardens with Elena at Sam's insistence, never alone, never unwatched. She developed a habit of observing during these walks, the same attentiveness that had made her good at anticipating customers' needs. Today, she noticed the security camera near the east gate. It pointed toward the perimeter wall, away from the mansion. 3 days ago, it had been angled differently. She was certain of it. "Elena," Joan said carefully, "was the security system updated recently?" The head of security's expression remained neutral, but Joan saw the slight tension in her jaw. "Why do you ask?" "That camera, it's pointed the wrong way." Elena stopped walking. For a long moment, she studied Joan with eyes that seemed to reassess everything. "You're observant. I spent years noticing things people didn't say out loud." Something shifted in Elena's posture. Not quite trust, but a flicker of respect. "Stay observant," she said quietly, "and come to me if you notice anything else that feels wrong." It wasn't a denial. It was a confirmation that Joan's instincts were correct. Something in this fortress was broken, and Joan was beginning to understand that the danger hadn't ended at the restaurant. The screaming pulled Joan from sleep like a fist through water. Betty thrashed in the darkness beside her, small limbs fighting against blankets that had become enemies. Her voice came out raw and terrified, words tumbling over each other too fast to understand. "No, no, no, don't! The glass! Daddy, we're—" Joan's hands found Betty's shoulders, gentle but firm. Years ago, when Joan was 10 and the world had taught her that some things couldn't be fixed, a school counselor had shown her techniques that sounded simple but worked when nothing else did. She used them now. "Betty, Betty, look at me." Joan kept her voice low, steady. "You're safe. Feel the bed under you. That's real. The blankets, real. My hands, real." Betty's eyes opened but didn't see her, still trapped somewhere between the restaurant and sleep. Her breathing came in panicked gasps that would lead to hyperventilating if Joan didn't intervene. "Breathe with me. In through your nose." Joan demonstrated, counting slowly. 1, 2, 3, 4. "Hold it. Now out through your mouth. 1, 2, 3, 4. It took 6 cycles before Betty's breathing began to sync with hers, 8 before the girl's eyes finally focused on Joan's face. "You're here," Betty whispered. "I'm here." "Can we go outside?" Betty's voice was small in the darkness. "Mummy used to take me to the garden when I had bad dreams. She said the sky was bigger than any nightmare." Joan glanced at the clock, 1:43 in the morning. But something in Betty's expression made the rule-breaking seem necessary. They slipped through the French doors onto the balcony, then down the exterior stairs that led to the garden paths. The night air was cool against Joan's skin, carrying the scent of jasmine and something else she couldn't name. Solar lights marked the pathways with soft amber glows. Betty led her to a bench beneath a pergola heavy with climbing roses. The estate walls blocked most of the city light pollution, and the stars stretched overhead in a canopy Joan hadn't seen since childhood. They sat in silence for many minutes. Joan had learned that sometimes silence was what children needed most, space for their thoughts to settle like sediment in water. "I saw him at the restaurant." Betty's voice cut through the quiet like a blade. One of the men with guns. Joan's pulse quickened, but she kept her tone neutral. What do you mean?
His face. I knew it. Betty pulled her knees to her chest, making herself smaller. He comes to Daddy's office parties sometimes, the ones downstairs in the big room. He always smiles at me and asks about school, but his smile is wrong, like it doesn't reach the rest of his face. Joan's mouth went dry. Did you tell your father? Betty shook her head. I couldn't remember at first. Everything was so loud and scary, but in my dreams I keep seeing him, the way he looked at Daddy before the shooting started. Like he was sorry, but not sorry enough to stop. The garden felt suddenly smaller, the walls closer. Joan understood with terrible clarity what this meant. The attack wasn't random. Someone inside Sam's organization had orchestrated it. Someone with access. Someone trusted. Someone who might be in this house right now. We need to tell your father, Joan said quietly. Betty's fingers found Joan's hand in the darkness. What if telling makes it worse? What if they... Her voice broke. Joan looked down at the child's face, at the fear there that no 7-year-old should have to carry. She thought about the footsteps in the hallway, Victor's calculating eyes, the security camera pointed the wrong way. Then we'll be careful about who we tell, she said quietly, but we have to tell someone. Betty nodded, and Joan felt the weight of what they'd both become settle around them like the cool night air. Witnesses, targets, conspirators against whoever wanted them dead. Elena found Joan in the library the next morning, where she'd been pretending to read while Betty colored at a nearby table. The head of security's expression was unreadable, but there was an urgency in the way she moved that made Joan's stomach clench. Walk with me, Elena said quietly, not a request. Joan glanced at Betty, who was surrounded by guards Sam had assigned after their garden conversation. The girl nodded, understanding in her eyes that shouldn't belong to someone so young. Elena led her to a room Joan hadn't seen before, down a corridor in the estate's east wing. Inside was what looked like a security operations center, monitors displaying camera feeds, communication equipment, a table covered in floor plans. Sam told me about Betty's nightmare, about what she remembered. Joan waited, years of service work teaching her when to stay silent. You understand what this means. Elena's dark eyes studied her with an intensity that made Joan want to look away. You're not just the woman who saved her daughter anymore. You're the one person Betty trusts completely, the one who knows there's a traitor in the organization. That makes you 3 things: valuable, vulnerable, and very much in danger. I know. Do you? Elena moved closer. Because most people in your position would be looking for the exit. Instead, you're sitting in the library like you're prepared to plant roots. Why? Joan thought about Betty's small hand gripping hers, the way the girl's breathing had finally steadied in the garden, the fear in her eyes when she'd asked, what if telling makes it worse? Because running won't keep her safe, and I'm the only person she has left who doesn't terrify her. Something shifted in Elena's expression. Not quite approval, but recognition. That instinct, the one that made you cover her body with yours at the restaurant, that's not normal. Most people freeze. You didn't. I didn't think. I just moved. Exactly. Elena pulled out 2 chairs, gesturing for Joan to sit. That's the difference between prey and predator. Prey thinks. Predators act. You have the instinct, Rhodes. You just don't have the training. Hold your hands like this. Elena adjusted Joan's grip on the practice knife, dull metal that still felt foreign and dangerous. You're not trying to stab, you're trying to create distance. Strike, pivot, run. They were in what Elena called the training room, though it looked more like a home gym with padded floors. Betty was with Sam in his office, the first time Joan had been separated from the girl for more than an hour in days. I'm a waitress, Joan said, feeling ridiculous with the knife in her hand. I don't know how to. You know how to read a room in 3 seconds. You know how to predict what people need before they ask. You know how to move through crowded spaces without being noticed. Elena circled her like a predator. Those are survival skills, Rhodes. We're just adapting them.
Joan lunged awkwardly. Elena sidestepped easily, but didn't criticize. Again, faster this time. On the fourth day of training, something clicked. Joan was practicing awareness drills, identifying exits, noting who entered the room, reading body language. When one of the guards walked past the training room door, his posture was wrong, too casual for someone on duty. His hand hovered near his waistband in a way that suggested he was checking for something. Elena, Joan's voice came out sharp. That guard, second shift rotation, he's carrying something he doesn't want noticed. Elena's eyes narrowed. She moved to the door, spoke quietly into her radio, then turned back to Joan with an expression that was almost impressed. How did you know? His shoulders, the way he keeps touching his side. I used to watch for customers who were planning to walk out without paying. Same tells. Elena pulled out her phone, typed something quickly. That guard has been flagged as possible Victor Moss contact. We've been watching him for 2 days. Joan's pulse quickened. You already knew? We suspected. You confirmed it in 30 seconds. Elena set down her phone. You see the pattern now. Rhodes, you're not helpless. You're observant, adaptive, and when pushed, you're willing to put yourself between danger and someone you care about. Those qualities make you dangerous to people who rely on others being weak. Joan looked down at her hands. They didn't look different, but something inside her had shifted. She wasn't the invisible waitress anymore. She was something else. Someone who could see the wolves coming, someone learning to bare her own teeth. Teach me more, Joan said. Elena smiled. It was the first genuine smile she had seen from her. Already planning to.
Sam's office was on the 3rd floor, a room Joan had only glimpsed through doorways. Dark wood paneling, leather chairs that probably cost more than her car, windows overlooking the estate grounds, reinforced glass that could stop a bullet. He stood when she entered, which surprised her. Men like Sam Siegel didn't stand for waitresses, but then she wasn't just a waitress anymore, was she? Sit. He gestured to the chair across from his desk. His voice carried the weight of someone accustomed to being obeyed, but there was something else beneath it. Exhaustion, maybe, or the kind of weariness that came from making impossible choices. Joan sat. Through the window behind him, she could see Betty in the garden with Elena, practicing what looked like a game but was probably another security drill disguised as play. I need to be direct with you, Ms. Rhodes. Sam leaned back in his chair, and for the first time since she'd met him, he looked almost vulnerable. My daughter has nightmares where she screams for you, not me. She won't eat unless you're in the room. Yesterday, when you were training with Elena, she sat outside the door for 40 minutes waiting for you to come back. Joan's chest tightened. She'd known Betty was attached, but hearing it described like that made it feel more real, more permanent. I'm sorry, she started to say, but Sam raised a hand. Don't apologize for being what she needs when I can't be. His jaw tightened. But I need you to understand what that means. For you, for her, for all of us. Sam opened a drawer in his desk and withdrew a manila folder. He placed it on the desk between them with the careful precision of someone laying down a weapon. $200,000. New identity, witness protection in a city of your choosing, full support for relocation, housing, job placement, everything you need to start over. Jones stared at the folder without touching it. The number alone was incomprehensible. It was 5 years of her salary at the Silver Oak. It was every bill paid, every anxiety about money erased. It was freedom. Or, Sam continued, his voice harder now, you stay. You become part of this family, which means you become part of my world. A world where people like Victor Moss orchestrate attacks on restaurants, where betrayal comes from those closest to you, where my daughter will always be a target because of who I am and what I do. He leaned forward, his tattooed forearms resting on the desk. If you stay, Joan, you become a target too. Not collateral damage, not someone caught in the crossfire. You become a person they need to eliminate because you're the one Betty trusts, the one who makes her feel safe. That makes you dangerous to them, which makes you a primary objective. Joan looked at the folder again. She thought about her cramped studio apartment, the overdue rent notices, the car that needed repairs she couldn't afford.
the life of quiet survival that had defined her existence for so long. Then she thought about Betty's small hand gripping hers in the hospital, the way the girl's breathing had synchronized with hers during the nightmare, the words that had frozen everyone in that sterile room. "You smell like Mummy's garden. Please don't leave me." "Can I think about it?" Joan asked, though she already knew her answer. "You have until morning." Sam's expression is unreadable. "But Joan, understand this. If you choose to stay, there's no halfway. You're either in or you're out. My world doesn't allow for anything in between." Joan stood in the doorway of the bedroom she'd been given, watching Betty sleep in the massive bed they'd been sharing. The girl had finally stopped fighting against sleep around 9, her small body curled beneath blankets that probably cost more than Joan's monthly rent. Her hand still clutched the edge of Joan's sleeve, even in sleep. The fabric was wrinkled for hours of being held, a physical reminder of the bond that had formed between them in the chaos of violence and fear. Joan thought about the folder in Sam's office. $200,000. A new life. Safety. But safety for whom? If she left, Betty would wake up alone again, would learn that the one person she'd allowed herself to trust had abandoned her like everyone else, would face the nightmares and the danger with only the father whose world had created the threat in the first place. Joan walked to the bed and carefully extracted her sleeve from Betty's grip, replacing it with the edge of a blanket. The girl's fingers tightened around the fabric without waking, and Joan felt something crack open in her chest. She'd made her choice the moment she'd thrown herself over Betty's body in the restaurant. Everything since then had just been the process of understanding what that choice meant. By morning, she would tell Sam she was staying, and when the wolves came, because they would come, she would be ready to show them what happened when someone threatened her cub.
The lights died at 2:17 in the morning, not gradually, but all at once, a sudden absence that transformed the estate from fortress to tomb in the space between heartbeats. Joan woke instantly, years of light sleeping in cheap apartments making her sensitive to any change in her environment. Betty stirred beside her, still caught in the haze between sleep and waking. "Joan, I'm here." Joan's hand found the girls in the darkness. "Stay quiet." The backup generators should have kicked in within seconds. Elena had explained the security protocols during their training sessions. Redundant systems, fail-safes built upon fail-safes. The darkness stretching past 10 seconds meant something was deliberately, catastrophically wrong. Footsteps in the hallway, multiple sets, moving with coordinated efficiency of people who knew exactly where they were going. Joan's pulse spiked, but her mind went cold and clear the way it had at the restaurant. She'd told Sam her answer that morning, had looked him in the eye and said she was staying. Now she understood what staying meant. She pulled Betty from the bed, moving silently in the darkness toward the corner of the room she'd memorized during Elena's drills. "Remember what Elena taught you? We're playing the quiet game now. No talking, just hold my hand." Betty's fingers squeezed hers. Once for yes. Joan's hands found the seam in the wall paneling, the entrance to the service corridor Elena had shown her 3 days ago. "In case you ever need to move through the house without being seen," Elena had said, and Joan had cataloged the information the way she'd once memorized table layouts and customer preferences. The panel swung open silently, revealing darkness deeper than the bedroom. Joan pulled Betty inside and eased the door shut behind them. She could hear voices now, muffled by walls but close enough to make her skin crawl. "Third floor, east wing. Where's the girl?" Victor's voice cut through the others, calm and authoritative. "Find them both. No witnesses this time." Joan's jaw clenched. She moved through the service corridor with Betty pressed against her side, one hand trailing along the wall to maintain orientation. Her waitress instincts kicked in without conscious thought, the same spatial awareness that had let her navigate crowded dining rooms with hot plates, now adapted to navigate darkness with a terrified child. She counted doorways as they passed, memorized turns, built a mental map the way she'd once tracked which tables needed water refills and which customers were ready for their check. They emerged into the kitchen through a door disguised as part of the pantry shelving. Emergency lighting cast everything in dim red, enough to see by but not enough to feel safe. Joan scanned the space with new eyes, not a kitchen but a tactical environment. Exits, cover, potential weapons.
Betty tugged her hand. When Joan looked down, the girl pointed toward the main hallway. Shadows moved there, backlit by flashlights. At least 3 men, maybe more. Joan pulled Betty toward the sub-basement stairs, the route Elena had made her memorize. For laundry and maintenance, Elena had said. But Joan understood now it was an escape route, a last resort for when the fortress became a trap. She's good at hiding, a voice drifted from somewhere above them. Learned it from her mother, probably. But there's nowhere to go. Victor's men control the gates. Joan recognized the voice, the guard she'd flagged during training, Victor's inside man. Her hand found the knife Elena had given her, tucked into the waistband of her sleep pants. She'd never imagined actually using it, had practiced the movements as an academic exercise, something to make Elena happy. Now the weight of it felt like a promise. The sub-basement was older than the rest of the house, stone walls and low ceilings that spoke of a time before the estate had been renovated into luxury. Joan navigated by touch and memory, pulling Betty through spaces that smelled of dust and concrete. Her years of invisibility became armor. She knew how to move without making sound, how to read the subtle shifts in air pressure that indicated nearby movement, how to anticipate which direction danger would come from based on nothing more than instinct and observation. They passed through the old wine cellar, through what might have been servants' quarters a century ago, through passages that the architects probably forgot existed, the kind of spaces that people like Victor, who'd never had to navigate the invisible infrastructure of service, would never think to search. Betty stumbled once, and Joan caught her before she could fall. The girl's breathing was quick and shallow, edging toward panic. Joan crouched down, finding Betty's face in the darkness.
"You're doing so well," she whispered. "Just a little further. Remember what we practiced? Count with me. 1, 2, 3, 4. Betty's breathing synchronized with hers, the technique that had worked during nightmares now working during something far more real. They moved on. The tunnel opened into the gardens near the east wall, hidden behind an overgrown hedge that Joan had noticed during her walks with Elena. She'd filed it away as interesting but irrelevant. Now it was salvation. Rain had started falling while they were underground, cold and steady. Joan pulled Betty close, shielding her as much as possible as they moved along the perimeter toward the gatehouse. She could see lights moving in the main house, flashlight beams cutting through windows. Then she saw him, Sam, backing toward the gardens with Elena at his side, both armed, both bleeding. 3 of Victor's men advancing on them with the patient confidence of predators who knew their prey was cornered. Joan looked down at Betty. The girl's eyes were wide in the darkness, reflecting the distant lights. She was shaking, but she wasn't crying, wasn't making a sound. "Stay here," Joan whispered, "behind this hedge. Don't move until I come back for you." "Joan," Betty's voice cracked. "I learned from the best." Joan pressed a kiss to the girl's forehead. "You taught me that being small and quiet is a superpower. Now I'm going to teach them that invisible doesn't mean helpless." She straightened, knife in hand, and moved toward the men who'd come to kill the only family she'd ever chosen. The first light came soft and gray through the library windows, turning the rain-soaked gardens into watercolor. Joan sat in the leather armchair Sam had pulled close to the fireplace, Betty asleep against her chest. The girl's breathing was finally even, no longer hitching with the aftershocks of fear. Joan's shoulder ached where one of Victor's men had caught her with the butt of his gun before Elena had taken him down. Her knuckles were split from where she'd connected with someone's jaw. She couldn't remember whose, the details of the fight already blurring into fragmented images of darkness and adrenaline and the desperate need to get back to Betty. But they were alive, all of them. Victor was in custody, along with the 4 men who'd breached the estate. The others, the ones who'd stayed loyal, were already working to dismantle the network he'd built within Sam's organization. Elena had coordinated it all with the efficient brutality of someone who'd been planning for this possibility since the restaurant attack. Sam stood at the window, his tattooed arms crossed over his chest, watching the sun struggle through the clouds. He'd been stitched and bandaged by the estate's doctor an hour ago, but he'd refused to rest. I understood. Sleep felt impossible when the world had just tried to kill you. "She didn't ask if you were leaving." Sam's voice was quiet, almost wondering. He didn't turn from the window.
When I found you both in the garden, she was terrified, shaking, but she wasn't asking if you'd stay. She already knew. Joan looked down at Betty's face, peaceful in sleep despite everything. One small hand rested against Joan's collarbone, fingers curled loosely around the fabric of her shirt, not gripping anymore, just resting, trusting. I told her I wouldn't leave. Most people say things they don't mean when they're scared, or when they think it's what someone wants to hear. Sam finally turned to face her. His eyes were bloodshot, exhausted, but there was something else there too. Recognition. You meant it, even before tonight, even when I offered you the money. It wasn't a question, but Joan answered anyway. Yes. Sam moved to the chair across from her, settling into it with a wince that suggested his injuries were more extensive than he'd admitted. For a long moment, he just looked at his daughter, sleeping safe in the arms of a woman who'd been a stranger 2 weeks ago. I've spent Betty's entire life trying to keep her separate from what I do. Thought I could give her a normal childhood if I just built the walls high enough, hired enough guards, kept her isolated from the violence. He shook his head. But the violence found her anyway, found her in a restaurant during lunch, in a place I thought was safe. You can't protect her from everything, Joan said quietly.
No, but you can. Sam leaned forward, his voice carrying a weight that made Joan's chest tighten. You threw yourself over her body without thinking, found her when trained guards couldn't, got her out of a house full of armed men, using routes that my own security team had forgotten existed. You didn't do it because I'm paying you or because you're afraid of me. You did it because you love her. The word hung in the air between them. Love. Joan hadn't let herself name it before, but hearing Sam say it out loud made it real, undeniable. I didn't plan to. I was just supposed to survive my shift at the restaurant. None of us plan for the things that change us. Sam's expression softened. My wife used to say that family isn't who you're born to, it's who you die for. I never really understood what she meant until I watched you tonight. Betty stirred against Joan's chest, mumbling something unintelligible before settling again. Joan's hand moved automatically to smooth the girl's curls, the gesture as natural as breathing now. I need to know if you understand what you're choosing, Sam said. This isn't a job. This isn't temporary. If you stay, you're family. That means everything that comes with it, the danger, the complications, the impossible choices. It means Betty will call you something other than Joan eventually, and we'll all have to figure out what that means. Joan thought about her studio apartment, probably still waiting for her somewhere in the city, the life she'd lived before the Silver Oak, before the gunfire, before a 7-year-old girl had gripped her hand and said words that had changed everything. That life felt like it belonged to someone else now. I've never had a family, not one that chose me anyway. Not one that I chose back. She looked up at Sam, saw the exhaustion and hope warring in his expression. I'm staying, not because I don't have anywhere else to go, but because this is where I want to be. Sam nodded slowly, something releasing in his shoulders. Then welcome home. Elena appeared in the doorway, still in tactical gear, her dark hair pulled back in a severe bun. She looked at the three of them. Sam in his chair, Joan holding Betty, the soft light of dawn making everything feel suspended in amber, and something like satisfaction crossed her face. The estate is secure, she reported. All of Victor's people are accounted for. The perimeter is locked down, and I've brought in additional personnel from the Riverside team. Good. Sam stood, wincing again. Get some rest, Elena. You've earned it. So have you both. Elena's eyes moved to Joan. That was good work tonight, Rhodes, using the service passages, keeping her quiet and calm, getting to us before Victor's men could finish what they started. She paused. You're not what I expected when Sam first brought you here. What did you expect? Joan asked. Someone who'd run at the first opportunity. Elena's expression held something that might have been respect. I'm glad I was wrong. After Elena left, Sam moved to the door, then paused. Joan? Thank you for giving her something I couldn't, someone who makes her feel safe just by being in the room. Joan looked down at Betty again,
at the child who'd somehow become hers in the span of weeks, measured in crisis and choice. "She gave me something too," she said quietly, "a reason to stop being invisible." Betty woke slowly, her eyes opening to find Joan's face inches from her own. For a moment there was fear, an echo of the night before, but then recognition settled in, and with it, peace. "You came back," Betty whispered. "I told you I would. And you fought the bad men? I heard Daddy telling Elena you were really brave." Betty's small hand moved to touch Joan's bruised cheek with careful fingers. "Does it hurt?" "A little, but I'm okay." Betty was quiet for a moment, studying Joan's face with the serious intensity of someone much older. "Are you my family now? Like really family, not just staying here family?" Joan felt something crack open in her chest, the last wall she'd been keeping in place, crumbling under the weight of a child's hope. "Yes, really family." "Good." Betty nestled back against her, sighing with the contentment of someone who'd finally found solid ground. "I love you, Joan." The words should have terrified her, should have sent her running back to the safety of invisibility and emotional distance. Instead, they felt like coming home. "I love you too, sweetheart." She was finally, impossibly home. If this tale of found family and choosing to stay touched your heart, thank you for being here. These stories exist because of you. Smash that like button, subscribe, hit the bell, and drop a heart if you believe family is built on choice, not blood. It keeps these stories alive. Outside, the rain had stopped. The gardens glistened in the morning light, washed clean. The estate would need repairs: broken windows, damaged security systems, the physical scars of the night's violence. But the foundation held, the walls stood. And inside, in the library, where dawn light painted everything gold, 3 people who'd been strangers were becoming something else, something chosen, something worth fighting for. A family forged in fire, built on the unshakable foundation of a choice made in chaos, to protect, to stay, to love despite the cost. Joan looked out the window at the world beyond the estate walls, a world that had once held all her dreams of escape, and realized she was no longer looking for a way out. She was finally, impossibly, home.